Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee. So we are now recording the Real Talk presentation with Don Rattan, Travis Pendleton, and Nicole Hines. So the very first question today, it seems so innocent, but when we talk about labels, with the three of you women here on the panel today, what's the right term? Is it Black? Is it African American? Is it something else that we're not aware of? Help us learn, please.
As for me, I use the term Black, and that's because I have not taken the time to trace my history. I don't even know if it can be traced. And so I use the term Black, and I use the term Black with pride. I capitalize the B. I think the dictionary or something just changed to start to capitalize the B in it. But for me, that brings in, it gives me a kinship with Blacks from Africa, from the Caribbean, from all walks of life, and who've had generations here, as well as who are just coming over and immigrating. So for me, Black is a term that I prefer, but I'm not offended by African American, and I'm not offended by people of color.
And for me, I'd have to say, prior to George Floyd and everything that's been going on, it was uncomfortable for me, but I would use African American because it's been the latest one. I pulled out my birth certificate. It says my parents are Negro. It doesn't have my race on it, but I was born in 1967. So I know in my lifetime, I've gone from Negro to Black to African American, and just trying to keep up with who keeps giving us a new label and what is it supposed to be. But in this time and watching other conversations with other Black women, Black is what feels most comfortable to me. So that's where I'm finally willing to sit and be able to identify myself with, because I've been asked that by people, and I don't even know how to answer it. Like, I don't know what to tell you is the right thing to say, but I can now say for myself it's Black. And I did do a little survey on Facebook this morning for you guys, and the majority, I had like 40 responses, and other than like 2 people, everybody said Black. So that's just something to kind of go from.
I think what I would add to that is it really depends on the person. I think that we should recognize that there are different ways that people want to identify, just like they have different preferences, and allow a lot of space for that, and use the terms that the person that you're talking to are going to be comfortable with. Because I think that's also because, you know, like I said, identity is really complex. And I'll give you a little bit of a story. I refer to myself as African American. If a conversation is going really long, at some point I'm going to start saying Black, and that's because I'm trying to speed up what I'm saying, like the number of words. I grew up in Missouri, and as part of elementary school education, at some point they start wanting you to go into your roots. Where's your mama from? Where's your daddy from? Where's your grandma from? Where are their people from? And the problem with that in my family is that my parents did not have any information, and they really weren't interested in finding out. So I had the least amount to show during those show and tell presentations in elementary school, and I kept that memory. Fast forward, I'm looking for a college to go to. And I graduated in the 90s, and so what started to happen during that time is people were going back to Ghana, and they're going back to experience that slave trade and the door of no return and all of that. And I really wanted to find a place where, you know, I feel like I'm from, like just a place to pinpoint. African American people, Black people are some of the only ones that don't have a country of origin. So when I say African American, I'm trying to identify to a whole entire continent. I've done some research to know that I'm pretty sure my family are descended from slaves, and that's how I got here. But we survived that, and that legacy is part of who I am. And so I identify as African American, but that's my story that I'm sharing with you. And everyone's got a different story. I think it's important to honor that.
And I'd like to just piggyback on that just a little bit and say that's why I'm not comfortable with the African American, because I know that I am Nigerian, Sierra Leonean, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. So by saying African American to me is like negating all that I am. And that's too long for me to always say I'm blah, blah, blah. So just saying Black, because that's what people see. And I wish I could just say I'm American and let it be, that's the label I'd like to have. That is my nationality, be able to say American and be done with it. But we live in a space and a time where we have to put these labels on people. So since what they're gonna see, to me, what I see is a Black woman in the mirror, that's what I identify with.
And to piggyback off of that, a lot of people think that I don't see color, or if they're describing, you ran into any of us, what did she look like? Oh, well, she had on a necklace or earrings. It's really okay to say she was Black. That's what it is. And that's what you saw. And more than likely, it's one of the top 3 things that you saw about me. It's not offensive. Society has made Black be an offensive color in our language and in our socialization, but it really is not offensive at all to me.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I think that's one of the number one things that people use to identify others. And there has been a lot of negative connotation assigned to color. The darker it is, the worse it is. That's not true, but that's the narrative. And that's what's instilled across the world. And so that's why we have questions like, well, what do you want me to call you? I think that's part of the reason.
When you guys go that direction with it, though, what I think about is when it's someone white, we don't say, or white people don't say, oh, it was a white woman, blah, blah, blah. It's only the people of color that get identified with that. So that's where I do end up having a problem with it, because that's what I'm sensitive to as a person of color, especially when it's coming from someone white. I never hear them say, yeah, there was a white woman in a pair of red shoes with blah, blah, blah. So for me, it's just one of those things that, not that we can fix society, but it is something I feel that people need to be sensitive to. If you're going to use it, if you're going to use that label, if you're white, are you using it for yourself? Probably not, because in America, we're living in this white world where that is the overall given. The example I like to give is with the news. When you pay attention to the news, when someone has done something wrong, or if they're talking about someone, if it's white, they don't say white male 34, whatever, whatever. It's just male 34, whatever. But if it's someone of color, they always make sure to put that label on us, and then it's just a given. And I don't know, but it seems like for white people, they don't even bother to think about how that bad guy was probably a white guy, because they didn't give a label on it. But we hear all the other labels for everyone else when a crime is committed or something is going on. So I kind of sit in a different place with it. Depending upon what's going on, I can find it offensive. Just depends on how, when and where that.
And I've seen white women have said it's offensive. You know, they don't want to be called white, you know, or it's offensive, or they feel like some guilt about it. And like, that's one of the, again, the top 3 things I probably noticed the first time I meet you, and not notice it in a bad way, but notice it in a neutral way, is, wow, she has on some awesome earrings. I love her shoes, and she's white. You know, it's not, we need to neutralize both of those words, as that is a characteristic of you, but it's not defining anything else past your friendship, if that makes sense, or as you get to know each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think that helps us understand why many people, regardless of the color, we don't know what's right or what could be offensive. And generally, none of it is intended to offend, but to describe. So thank you for those answers. So this next question kind of melds right into this. So the term BIPOC, the Black Indigenous people of color, I think that, I hope I'm not the last person on the planet that maybe within the last 2 or 3 months, I had to actually Google it, because I did not know what it was. And so talk to me a little bit about that. So one of the questions that came through, this would be a 2-part question, is that term, and I understand the reference to it, but the question was, how do non-BIPOC people ask for participation from BIPOC women without adding to their emotional group? Who would like to go first on that one?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what participation meant. There's social, there's work. So, you know, you got to open your mouth and just not be afraid to start the conversation. I think that it's hard to convey intention because, so we have an assistant, she's Latino, and you've heard with all this racial unrest, just go check on people of color. So she's out walking her dog with her daughter or something, and a white woman comes up to her and is like, hello, how are you? How are you doing? What's your hair like? Where do you live? What's your ethnicity? I mean, she just like launched into all the like people of color, and she had good intentions, but my assistant was like, whoa, like it was a neighbor, and I'm walking my dog and my kid, and you just came and assaulted me with all these questions. So a relationship has to be the foundation, regardless of color. You wouldn't want anybody of any color coming at you that way. So it's really just build a relationship to the extent that you can. You know, there's a time component. Make sure that person's open to participate again if this social work. Be prepared for them to say no. And I told my sister, you should have just told her, listen, push the brakes. You know, let's have coffee, but, you know, don't give me a whole list of questions right here on the sidewalk. Because a lot of people have more in the last 8 weeks probably come at all of us as color to go, hey, what's going on? How you doing? And while we appreciate that, sometimes you're almost reliving some trauma over and over again. And sometimes we just want to have a 24 hours without seeing the, you know, the latest racial incident that's happened in the news or discussing it.
So for me, I'd have to say BIPOC, Mona, I had to look it up too. I had no clue what was happening. I had just in the last year even learned POC, maybe 6 months. I didn't even know that one. And POC kept coming up. I'm a yoga teacher and it kept coming up in yoga conversations. And I had to look at, I was like, oh, people of color, I think they're talking about me. Like I didn't know what was happening. And then BIPOC, that's just been since George Floyd that I, you know, had to research that and find out what that meant. And I would have to piggyback with Dawn. It's more of a, it's an individual, I don't know what asking for participation means. I didn't know either participation in what, but I would say go on the individual and communication is so important, and don't be afraid to be told no. I don't want to discuss. I don't want to go there, because we are all individuals. I'm very open. You guys know my Facebook, who are Facebook friends with me. I'm very open and having a lot of conversations about topics, but other people are not. They're stuck in they need to go figure it out. I don't want to talk about it. And that piggybacks on what Dawn said. I think that's because of a lot of the trauma. I shouldn't say all, but I would say a lot of Black people, because I don't want to say people of color, because I don't know about being brown or yellow, or that's probably not even the proper term to use, saying yellow, but other nationalities. But for Black people, we've all, I won't say, most of us have experienced a lot of trauma in school throughout the year. I think about the trauma and the PTSD that we go through. So it doesn't mean you have to whisper when you want to reach out about things, but just don't, I think that brings in the way, don't be under your feelings hurt if you come across someone who just does not want to go there because they have their own stuff going on, or just don't want to go there. But it's nothing personal is what I want to say to that.
Mm-hmm. I think I would agree with a lot of what Don and Nicole have also said, in that I think it has to do with relationship. I think it's good to ask questions, but I think it depends on how you ask that question. So, hey, what's your, that's not the best approach. What your relationship is to the person that you're talking to, how close are you with them? I also know that for some people during this time, they are feeling like they're getting so many calls and emails that it feels like a colleague in another part of the country said it feels like a full-time job. Trying to answer these questions and be available and figure out what you're trying to say. And since most of us are working from home, things like that, we're not able to escape things like we normally would. So the amount of trauma that you experience as a Black person, African-American person, however you're describing yourself, on a daily basis, you get to compartmentalize that when we're not in a pandemic. You leave that in the house and maybe go do your job, and hopefully you don't catch something in the car, some news report that's happened that you got to process before you go back into the office. Now it's just constantly all the time. And for some of us, at least I can say for me, some parts of it have been stressful, because I feel like I'm trying to figure out what I want to say, answer people's questions if they have them, be respectful, trying to balance everything. I'm a consultant, so I'm always worried about my potential clients, and I'm trying to get out of worrying about how they feel, because I think I spend a lot of time worrying about how a white person is going to feel if I have to actually say what I think about things or what the actual situation is. So that's part of that, asking for your participation. Some of that is the freedom to say what you want to say. And I've realized that what I'm trying to do is get to be free and to say what I need to be able to say, and to be able to breathe and not have to balance and manage so many different things, which is, what is a white person going to say? Or if they reach out to me, I need to then, and they say, oh, Therese, I enjoy working with you. I hope you're doing okay. you're great. Then I have to go, you are also great. Blah, 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 blah. I hope we can, I don't want, that's just added stuff. It would be great to not have to do that. At the same time, you think about participation. There are also people that are talking about, well, why don't you, if you need someone to educate you or to help you, have you considered paying them for that service? If you want them to train you and teach you, compensate them for their time. That's a whole other level of commitment. And maybe that's too scary and, you know, maybe too foreign, I don't know. But I think there's other ways of thinking about participation and its impact. And you probably would be better served by, and I'm probably going to say this a lot today, I feel, do the hard work, educate yourself. There are things that you should know, but you haven't figured that out. And I'm speaking specifically to white people in this country. Things have just happened, and they've been happening to Black people, they've been happening to Asian people, they've been happening to Latino people, etc. And you've been able to be oblivious to that. Meanwhile, they just deal. And now the light bulb has gone off, and so you want people's time to help you understand. But there are tons of resources that you can dig through to get some sort of a basis before you ask all your questions.
Now, if I can speak, Mona. For me, I'm wide open. I've been waiting for this my whole life. So Therese, I hear you. Dawn, wherever you sit, girl, I understand. But for me, I'm open. My messenger is open, and I am going in. Most of my clients are white. I don't bring up topics, but 90% of them come in wanting to have these discussions with what's going on. And I am an open book. And we are having all those taboo conversations about race, religion, and politics. They're going in, not just wanting to know, like they're asking questions and they're wanting to know. And I am seizing this moment because this will not last forever. And like I said, this is the first time that I've been able to feel like I openly and frankly could talk to my white counterparts about what it's really like. And I'm loving every minute of it. So I'm here for all of it because I mean, you know, I see the aha moments take place for people, so.
I think I go back and forth. I think there was a time in my 20s, 30s, you know, I want to get an engineering degree. I want to show that I'm professional. I want to show that all Blacks aren't like whatever that is and be a model minority. Then once I hit my 40s, I was like, I really don't care what you think about me. I don't care because I feel like you know, check a box. Oh, they've got a degree, they've got a job, they live in a certain neighborhood, they send their kids to a certain school. Then I match enough criteria to be their Black friend or be invited to the party. And I hit a point in my 40s where I was just like, I really don't care. I don't need to tell you any of my credentials to validate myself. And along with that, I don't feel like I need to educate you on how Black folks work. And so now that everything's happened, I've turned a little bit from that, and it's like, okay, like the protests. People are like in arms about the protests. And I'm like, you don't understand. The government has never given anybody anything. It has had to be fought for. I just watched the 4-hour series. I was telling the group about women's suffrage. It took 72 years for white women, mostly white women, fighting for the right to vote and a bunch of smaller Black women's groups. They had to fight for that. They weren't given that. So they protested, hunger strikes. Some of the women died before the right was given. Same with civil rights. Same with, you know, go back to the Boston Tea Party and the forming of America. So for me, I'm happy to discuss, let's put protesting in a historical perspective that no, you don't approve of it. No, it's uncomfortable. So, you know, I've gone back to, well, let me not explain, but I'm happy to talk this out and help you see the perspective that I'm coming from with specific to the protests and all the racial injustices and things and systemic things that have been going on. So I've changed from that. But yeah, I guess I'm saying I go back and forth between the two. And there are so many resources out there. In fact, before this call, I had like 3 diversity and inclusion experts, like people who work and earn money in this field. I just talked to them and bounced some ideas off of them. So there are people, there are resources, there's websites, there's everything out there.
So I love the different perspectives, and I think it's important that no matter what our color, would it be safe to, for example, Nicole, if I'm chatting with you, or Dawn, Therese, any of you, to say, gosh, I have some questions, and if it's okay that I ask, could I ask? And if you don't want to talk about it, that's totally fine. I mean, what's ever wrong with that? And Therese, you brought up such an excellent point of and Dawn just now too, there are consultants that this is what their livelihood is. So if it's that important, you go to the experts. If we're going to learn a new language, we go to the experts, right? So thank you for that. So this may be a little bit of a touchier, I don't know. So if you could think about your white friends and think, boy, I sure wish so-and-so would ask me about whatever. Are there any of those questions that you wish somebody would ask that they haven't felt comfortable? What are we oblivious to?
Like I said, the protests, I'm fine talking about that and putting it in perspective so that people aren't like, there's a bunch of thugs out here doing stuff. I think just understanding that there's different experiences. We all have this bubble we've been raised in, but there's life going on outside of that bubble that you need to understand that's going on. And because you haven't seen it or experienced it, heard about it or lived it, doesn't mean it's not happening.
For me, I wish they knew real American history. That's why I've been dedicating so much of my Facebook page to it. This Euro narrative that's given about even the most horrific things, like how we are able to romanticize, and we see it, some of our leaders romanticize about slavery or taking Native American land away. Excuse me, I saw last week where a survey was done like 2015 that I'm going to get it wrong, but I was shocked at how many Americans did not know that Native at all. Like that, my mind. So if they could just become more aware, and again, just learn real, not the history we're taught in the textbooks, which is so much of which is not true. You know, if they're I'm wondering how many are questioning what's going on with Christopher Columbus and why his statue has been taken down. I kind of giggle about it because I'm like, I bet they're like, what's happening? He discovered America. You can't discover a civilization that's already here. I'm sure that most don't know that many people of color, Black people, people with African origin, were here before Christopher Columbus. We're here for many, many years. So even for any of us who can even try to trace back our roots, we probably can only go back so far, but we did not come over on slave ships. I wish that white Americans knew that and knew our real history, and not where it begins with what the establishment with the powers that be wanted to create about one group of people being smarter, better, what have you, than another. It's like, no, you know, everybody was coming to this land, you know, prior to Christopher Columbus, and it wasn't just the Native Americans that were here. And that's the research that they need to do. I'm not going to do it for anybody. It's not that hard to do, but it's proven with evidence. This is not somebody's opinion. These are factual things that are able to be proven by, you know, with botanical evidence, by plants that are indigenous to other continents, by the metals, by the weapons that were found here, by things that Christopher Columbus even took back home. That evidence is here. And that's what I wish that my white counterparts knew.
That is so awesome. I want to say this, add to that, just maybe take it a different perspective. I think your question assumes that you have close white friends as a Black person, African American person. Because I was trying to think about the answer to this question, and I thought, there was a time in my life, because I grew up in a suburban community in our metro, that everybody around me was white. My first best friend, you know, your second grade best friend, was a white girl. Because that's who was in my class. I mean, like, that's who was around me, right? And so we had some, you know, oh, what's going on with your hair, you know, type of thing in terms of just being little kids. But then I got older, and we lived in predominantly white areas. It took me 18 years to find the 3 ladies that are my best friends, and they're Black. And that matters to me because there's a connection there. And I can tell really now because, again, I've had an opportunity to be with a whole lot of other people, people of color, than I have ever had at any point in my career. And there's something different about the vibe. There's something different about being in a space where there's more diversity than when there isn't. And I'm saying when I'm in a room full of white people, I mean, I can facilitate a conversation with people that don't look like me. I do it all the time. And they're white people and I'm the only person of color, and a lot of them will be men. So I don't really, over my personal journey, I don't really have a whole lot of like white women friends that are super close to me, right? So your question assumes that. And then, that closeness also has something to do with how much you trust them. And that trust is, do they come to your family reunions? Are you like, hey, this is my friend? Or do they say, hey, come to my house, but they never want to come to yours? Well, like, what is that relationship? And so when I just think about that, I think about some of my interactions, if it's with my colleagues, et cetera, and I think, white friends, white colleagues, when you're interacting, stop thinking about how you feel in a situation and what you need without any reference to the other people that are around you, their contributions in history. I'm in planning and design, so people of color get omitted and ignored routinely, like we contributed nothing to civilization because they don't teach you in school, they don't want you to know. And then it frames all of our policies, it shapes the way our cities are made, all of that type of thing. And so what I want is for people to be more curious about another person's perspective. And when you are curious, mean that, basically be genuine about that. When you are not, people can feel, they can observe it. I have colleagues, they're white, and they go, how you doing, Travis? And I can hear there's something in there when they're asking me, but I know them from previous conversations. They're not overly interested, and when stuff has happened to me, they don't understand, don't want to understand, and don't do anything about it to prevent it from happening. So to me, they're not genuine. So no, we're not gonna have a conversation about things. I guess someone can say, well, you should endeavor to have that conversation. I feel like for many things, people of color, indigenous people, et cetera, are going to have to approach all those conversations themselves and maybe start to create change when you're in spaces where people don't seem to understand. And that could be your colleague or your friend, because sometimes people are just oblivious. So I think that's a factor. And I want to share something with you, which is I have started working with a group, and they're planners and designers and healthcare people from around the country. And we want to introduce just an idea of being equitable and that type of thing. And one of the people who's in that group, her name is Mariela Alfonso. She was talking to us about something called radical empathy. And I want to share with you what our kind of working definition of that is. And it really gets to doing that work. And so for us, radical empathy has to do with endeavoring to do the utmost to see from another person's perspective, particularly if that person is Black, Indigenous, a person of color, an immigrant, someone who has been historically marginalized or underrepresented. That you do that while you also purposely make the choice that you frame things in a way that's anti-racist, and you use a common sense approach when you're trying to create spaces for them to be your friend or to work with you. And so I think if everybody could do that, I think our conversations would be easier, because we have to at some point start thinking about other people instead of just your space and what you're used to seeing and the images that you see and the movies that you see and all that kind of stuff. Think about someone else and be interested in them.
Well, I think we both, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I do have close white friends, but it's only been since the George Floyd situation. And I don't call them protests, and I don't call them riots. I call them demonstrations, because I feel like protesting and writing has such a negative connotation to it. I call them demonstrations. But since these demonstrations, we've been talking about race really for the first time. And for me, it's because the girlfriends in my life, no matter what their backgrounds are, our souls come together. It has nothing to do with our race. It really doesn't. But it's been nice. It's been healthy to be able to have these conversations. But if I can piggyback on what Travis said about finding her friends, I didn't, K through 12, being the only Black girl in the classroom, graduating from a class of like 600 kids from Shawnee Mission West, 500, 600, with only like I think it was 8 black kids, like 4 black girls, 4 white girls, like, I mean, I'm sorry, 4 black girls, 4 black guys. It's like, I didn't make any deep meaning connections with anyone when I was in K through 12. But I chose to go, and I think this is important. An HBCU, a historically black college or university, I chose to go to Spelman College because I wanted to see what my white classmates from K through 12 were experiencing. I wanted to be able to walk into a room and have it not be black girl, you know, what we talked about at the beginning of this talk, where it's like the label of black girl and then whatever. It's just always Nikki in the green shirt that's majoring in English or whatever. I envied that so much, and I wanted to have that experience of not having my race have anything to do with the experiences that I was going to have. And I think that's really important for white folks to understand why environments like that exist. It's because we want to have because we're not at the table, we're not invited to the table. And, you know, I'm using that literally and figuratively. So we create spaces, whether it's a black magazine or a black organization or a black Facebook group. Those exist because we're not invited or not welcome to be, even if we are allowed in, to be our authentic selves in those spaces. And so the friendships I have today, the deep, meaningful, long 30, 35-year relationships are from college, with those girls who were like me, having the same experience. And I thought I was going to be unique with coming in, like, oh, I'm from a suburb and I'm the only black girl. Well, most of the girls, I won't say most, a lot of the girls that I went to school with in college were having the same experience, and they were there for the same reason that I was. They just wanted to know what it was like to walk in a room and not have this preemptive thing to have to carry that baggage and unpack it for everyone to really explain why your answers or your viewpoint, your worldview, your opinion was what it was, because I'm a black girl and all this stuff, to have people understand where you were coming from. You walk into a room and everybody already gets it. And that's a space I think that my white counterparts need to understand. We live in 2 different spaces all the time. We live in 2 different Americas. We live in the big America, and then we live in this subculture. And I think that's probably for all people of color. We handle and operate in the big America and everything that goes on, from the news to the community to the environment to domestic policy. But then we have our smaller world that we have to figure out how to navigate in, and it's going on all the time. I think that's really important. I'm sorry, Dawn, you were going to say something.
No, I love everything you're saying. Touching on friends really quick. I think Nicole and Michelle did something a while ago for Central Exchange, and they really talked about, it was, can white women and black women be friends? What was that, like 6 months ago? Boy, that was so good. And but it basically comes down to, if this person's going to be your friend, they have to really, like, that radical empathy. Like, you can't be my friend and wish for all this to go away. I mean, because it's not going to be wished away. It's going to be a deliberate dismantling of systems. And you and me have to be friends and be, you know, what can we do? And so that's where I am with a lot of my friends that are non-white, is like, let's just not talk about it, and let's just, you know, have a glass of wine. And I haven't really brought it up to go, which side are you on? Because it really is about, like, are you about the equity and equality, or you just wanted to wish away and put it under the carpet? That's point number 1. Point number 2 is going back to what are white women oblivious about? Another thing I wrote about is confronting microaggressions. A lot of things when my friends have said, what can we do? I go, you are in all white spaces often. And I don't think they're necessarily saying like a racial joke, but they're saying something that is not right, is not respectful. You need to be able to raise your voice and have enough courage to say, not cool, don't do that in my presence. Here, let me correct you. And so that, I know, is not easy. I mean, I've been in situations, you know, you talked about one, Travis, and what do you say when people, you know, say something weird and it catches you off balance? But we've all got to elevate that game of calling out unacceptable behaviors. And then finally, moms, dads on here, your kids are getting all these subliminal messages right now. Do not assume that your kids are colorblind. Don't assume that your kids get it. Don't assume that your kids are not racist. I'm not trying to be funny, but at some point, you know, if you had kids of any age, their social order becomes more important than what you're saying at home. But you still got to drill in, what are our values at home? what are we drilling at home? So when you talk about what are they oblivious to, I think a lot of us are oblivious to what our kids are dealing with, talking about, going through, and accepting. And that, more than anything, is this next generation. We keep putting our hope and dreams in the next generation, but we got to have a real conversation and let your kids know what's acceptable in your home. I'm done.
You guys are so awesome. I think one of the things that I would add is just, and I really believe this, so I'm probably going to say it all the time, you just need to make sure you can have a quality, really good relationship. Make the effort to do that. And when you're able to, when you can do that, then yeah, you can ask your friends or colleagues questions because you have a genuine connection, like a meaningful connection, right? We make heart connections, we make soul connections. You can do that to some degree with your colleagues because you know the ones that you have a really good vibe with, you connect with, and you can tell that from what they give off when they're talking to you and whether or not you're going to be able to, click or connect with that. I do think, again, people should still, even though you have the most open relationship, things of that sort, you should still research. You should still read about what goes on in other communities. And don't just let things go by. And I'm saying that, meaning that sometimes things go by and people say, oh, I didn't even know that happened. It went right over my head. You experienced that? If you never have to see from another person's perspective, you're not going to ever understand. If you don't endeavor to learn or to put on someone else's shoes, stand in their space, see what that's like. Because I know that we're older now and we all use the word trauma. We didn't have those words when we were younger. You don't know what people have been through. And because of that, a lot of white people don't have the sensitivity to know. And I mean, when I say the sensitivity, it's also like the context of what you're talking about, and I'll give you this example. My job is planning and design. So I work with teams. We all work with teams. They teach you that in school. We're going to work in teams. We're going to do groups. We're going to separate and do different things. And so I was in a group of people and they were trying to figure out what to do with this African-American cemetery. And everybody in this group is white, and then there's one person that is not white but pretty much looks white, and everyone assumes that they are white, and that just kind of goes this like white passing. Okay, so we're talking about this and someone says, oh yeah, that place where these slaves are buried in unmarked graves, now we need to memorialize that. And they're like, yeah, that city had so many Black people there. Do you know how they got there? They got there because they were dragged there. They were slaves. That's why they were the majority of the population. They were there to build this. And then you're saying things like, yeah, well, we need to figure out how to memorialize this and don't spend very much time on it. So I'm sitting there as the only sort of descendant of anybody that looks like those people that, have long since passed. And my insides are hurting. And I'm trying to look like everything is okay. And the reason why I'm going through that and why those people are saying, oh yeah, they were so, part of the community, is because they don't understand the context of what that means. And that's because they're not doing the work. They don't have to do that. Someone's going to pay them to design whatever. And they'll just keep on doing that. Not understanding, not feeling, not connecting. And I hazard a guess that maybe if they were curious about people, maybe if they had more friends that didn't look like them, maybe they wouldn't think like that. But until you start getting curious, until you build those relationships, that's not going to happen. And when people, no offense, Nicole and Mona, I have been where you guys are in terms of crying and things, but when somebody is, when you're asking, you're trying to learn, and suddenly the weight of what they're sharing with you hits you, like as a person that's not representative of that race, when you start crying, unless it's mutual crying, okay, with one of you, the listener, is crying, that makes the other person have to comfort you and soothe you. And that takes the the focus of what you're talking about. Because now I got to comfort you. It's the same thing when people say, hey, how's it going? You're so great. I hope you're doing okay. And I got to go, oh, you're so great. I'm doing fine, etc. It like process that. I shared that with a friend and I said, yeah, I was talking to a colleague and we're talking about things and we have a really good relationship. And so I said, this and this and this and this and this, this is the situation. This is what's happening to me. And the weight of that affected her heart and she started crying. And so I extend my hand and I'm patting her shoulder. I'm like, it's okay. I'm okay. It's okay. And my good friend said, she should have known that that's something that affects you or that affects people that look like you. Because at some point we do have to be accountable for the amount of information that we have or don't have. And race is a huge thing that shapes our country. So we're to the point now where we can't not be accountable for that. Can't be ignorant. Although I know people are going to still come out of this and say, I don't understand what you're talking about. You're muted, Nicole.
Unmute myself, sorry. So Travis, so like if someone is telling me about something that's very hurtful, you know, I see a lot of clients every day and I hear a lot of stories about different things. And if I'm moved by it, as an empath, I will cry. I'm gonna cry about it.
Definitely.
They could be telling me a story third person about it, their sister or a cousin or whatever, and they're telling me some horrific story, I cry. So in context to that, you're saying that if I am crying, I'm not supposed to cry when I'm hearing a hurtful story, or I'm just trying to make sure I understand what am I supposed to be hiding how I'm feeling when they're telling me something that's really moving me? What exactly are you saying?
I would say this, and I'll give you a specific example. If I'm telling a white colleague about whatever, or a white friend about whatever has happened to me as a Black person in space, and that friend is overtaken by the weight of that and starts crying, I'm not crying. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm just telling you, this is the deal, etc. And then you start crying, that makes me have to start comforting you and make you feel better. That's my, I would say that would be probably my response. And I know that's the response of other people in my space. And so I would really like you to not do that on some level, unless we are to the point where we are having mutual crying together and sobbing and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. I know that things have happened and you might shed tears, or you might start crying, and you can, you know, if you're empathic, etc. And we all should be like that. You should want to connect and feel people. That's really important. But I don't think to the point where it puts the focus on what's going on you, especially if I'm saying that it's people like you that are doing this to me, that are causing me to feel this level of stress, this level of anxiety. Why do I share my story with you? And then you go, oh my gosh, that's happening by people who look like me. And then you, victim, turn around and try to make me feel better about that because now I'm crying. And that could be something too. I could just let you cry and wait for you to get over that and then keep on talking. But as a sensitive person, I am likely to want to hug you or try to have you stop crying, get you some Kleenex, tell you I'm okay, it's okay, let's keep on talking.
And see, for me, I sit in a different space with it. And that's why we're having this discussion. If someone is moved that way for me, I don't feel like they're making me do anything. For me, what it feels like is we are having a soul connection in this moment about this experience. And I actually probably am going to appreciate it even more because it lets me know that they're feeling it, that they really heard my words and they were able to empathize with me and how this felt. So I just want to make that clear for everyone that's listening. This is a great example where two different people are going to feel completely different. It goes back to the top of this conversation where we were saying individually, you've got to find out where everybody is and how they feel about different things. Because Travis and I sit in two different places, and I want to make that clear for anyone. You don't have to hold your feelings with me, and you don't have to not cry or feel like you're going to make me feel like I need to console you. It doesn't do that. Yeah, we'll sit in a space of like, wow, man, she really heard me. She really got it. Now, hopefully she'll go and tell her family at the next Thanksgiving dinner when someone's using the N-word, you know, the story that I've just told them of what it feels like to be in my shoes. I know a girl who told me whatever, and they can take that information and hopefully help with this movement, this betterment, this being better that we're all trying to do.
There's something in human resources training called like a significant emotional event. And I did a couple of stints while I was at Proctor Gamble, and when I leave operations and go to human resources. And what we did say when we do the diversity training was that in order for people to change, they have to have a significant emotional event happen in order to change their hearts and therefore change their ways, therefore change systems. So both of you have a point there, and it doesn't have to be tears, but the fact if someone's going through this and something drives them to tears or even anger or to, again, a significant emotional event, that might then put their feet and therefore their power in motion to make something different happen. So, you know, if someone is sitting there and they're completely unemotional as you're talking about someone getting killed or getting shot or something like that, they're not having that change of heart and change of mind and then therefore change of action. So there's something to an emotional upheaval to make people change, or at least that's what I was trained.
Such excellent points. And I loved, from my perspective, which is the only one I have, I loved hearing from Nicole about how she's saying, this is how I react and I'm okay. And I loved hearing Travis saying, this is how I react and I feel like I need to console you. And I think that's one of the things, no matter what our color, we all experience that. We have experienced that. And I was thinking to myself, if I'm in a meeting with Travis and something is coming up, I may say, hey, just a heads up, or Nicole, Vaughn, or any of the other many people on the call, I will say, I'm really emotional and I cry sometimes, but hey, that's my issue, not yours, so don't worry about it. And I can be that blunt and take my own tears. But I think it's important to know that we all react differently, but that's not anything I ever would think about saying when I get emotional about something. So thank you for your different perspectives on that. I'm going to touch on something we hadn't really, in our prep for this, we hadn't really talked about this idea of white women's tears, but it is very appropriate right now. And I'd like to get your perspective on that. And the short version, the lead up to the question is, within the last year or so, I was in a meeting where a white woman was telling her story that was racially prompted. And in telling her story, she got very, very emotional and very, very teary-eyed. And from across the room, there was this comment from a Black woman saying, oh, that's a white woman's tears. I had never heard that phrase. I didn't know what it meant. Can anybody, and I've talked to other people and understand from my perspective now, but Don, Nicole, Travis, can you shed any light on white women's tears?
What I'll say is when I was a manager of a group of white women, and it kind of does go to Travis's experience, but I say this about my kids too. Some people use tears and crying as a manipulative tool. And the tears get the focus away from the issue at hand. The tears, again, like you said, evoke the sympathy versus dealing with the real issue. So I'm not sure if that's what the woman meant, but I mean, my husband always used to laugh at me because I go, oh, you know, we're doing a performance review, and she started crying. I was like, okay, wipe your tears, and we're still gonna talk about what you did wrong. And so if maybe that's kind of it, is like tears sometimes as women, I used to do it with my dad, Black or white, and go, oh, and they get me out of punishment. And so in the workplace, sometimes those tears are not true tears. They're tears of manipulation. And so that's how I would have read what she thought. So maybe the woman across the room thought the white woman was trying to manipulate the situation. And I've definitely been in situations like that, where you got to get past that emotional and get to and not let it distract from the issue at hand.
So for me, not knowing the context of what the story was that the lady was telling, that crying, I have no idea what that part was about, but where it picks up where there's Black women going, oh, there she goes with the tears. What I mean, what I think of, and again, this is as space in their mind, again, not knowing what the story was, what was them sitting in a space like, huh, she thinks she's got something to cry about. Try being the person on the receiving end. If it was that kind of story, it sounds like it was, like a Black person did this and then this happened. And it's like, for the Black person, for the Black women, it's like, huh, yeah, imagine you think it was bad. You think you got something to cry about hearing about it. Imagine walking in my shoes, trade places with me and see what it's like. That's what I hear from it. So, and also kind of what Travis is saying, that's another angle. So what I'm thinking of it, how it could be like, lady, try living like that all the time. But then also, like Travis was saying in the previous segment about, well, she can speak for herself, but just about, oh, you're emotional about it. Now I got to make you feel better, lady across the table. And that might be how those Black women felt, like, oh, great, now we're going to get off topic. We've got to console her and make her feel better. We never feel better, so that's just my take on it. Travis?
I'll just add to that to say that when I hear that phrase, white women's tears, I think about all of the archetypes that we have about how white women are so delicate and so special and so desired and so pretty and so these wonderful, soft, kind of delicate things. And so, oh my gosh, they're crying, they're hurt, we need to do something about that. And I think sometimes they're literal tears, and sometimes they're just these other things that they're not real tears. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. I've got this going on. I've got that going on. Almost feel sorry for me on some level. Give me respite. When I'm in that situation, I don't get any breaks. I just gotta keep it rocking. I know exactly what's going on and it's all fine. And so I feel like there's a bit of a difference in that. And so when I hear that phrase, it makes me think about all of those issues of that being delicate, and we need to be careful. You should not be overstressed. We should not be overworked. You should not be over emotionalized, if that's even a word. We should, really take care of you. And so I think about all those things, not necessarily just the literal actual crime.
And there is historical context to that. There's numerous lynchings of Black men because they disrespected the gentle flower of a white woman. Towns were burned down over it. And so, Travis, you do pull in a historical perspective to that gentle flower. If she cried, now we've got to go and protect her femininity. So there is, if you go and read about, there's a lot of historical context to that phrase.
Yes, actually, I can piggyback on that, and some of you may know that's the Oklahoma, which was the misnomer. It was called the Oklahoma riots for so long, which now I think more people know about since George Floyd's death. It was actually the Oklahoma massacre, and as the story goes, that begot hundreds of people were killed. Black Wall Street was burned down, all from a story which is kind of like we don't have any validation in it, actually, but that whole town, all those people were killed from something that happened in an elevator with a young Black male and a white woman. So yeah, I think there is context to it. I've heard of, Mona, prior to what you were talking about. I think I looked it up after we talked about it, and I don't remember all of it, but yeah, there's a whole lot around the white woman's tears or white women's tears. But you start, Mona, from that particular situation with women at a table. So I don't know if that's really quite the same thing as the historical context of a white woman's tears. We might be talking about two different things with that. But again, knowing our history would help to be able to have a more valuable conversation around that.
I'm so glad I asked that question. And Dawn, I appreciate what you said. And I want to give a shout out to Dion King, because she put in the chat something very similar about these tears historically have been the reason why Black men have been killed. So again, it gets back to us learning, doing the research, knowing our stuff, knowing what happened. And it's not fun always, it's hard, but we've got to do it. We can't continue doing what we're doing. So, but I also, Dawn, appreciate what you said about sometimes it can be that manipulation. We've all seen those fake tears, little kids or adults or whatever, and it's like, hopefully we can kind of see through some of that sometimes. So appreciate that very much. I'd like to switch this conversation, but before I do so, Nicole, I just want to let you know that sometimes you're fading in and out a little bit. If that happens again, I'm going to turn off your video because sometimes that improves the audio bandwidth, but I hope I don't have to do that. And in the meantime, I want to let everybody know if you would like to send me a private message with a question, I'll see if I can fit it in over the next 25 minutes that we have. But I'd like to shift this a little bit to the professional world, and that means different things to different people. Some of us work in a public building, you know, there's small independent business owners. Some of you that are on the call right now may manage large staffs in a publicly traded company. So all of our situations are different, but we can imagine that supervisor and or boss who doesn't think that these things are a problem. From their perspective, everything's fine. No, we'll get over it. Don't worry about it. Oh yeah, I'll have a little chat with them. Everything's fine. How do we open up those conversations to those people in authority in our own organizations and let them know that, no, that's not gonna work. We need to do something different. Thoughts on that, please?
So when I worked at Proctor Gamble, again, a lot of learning I had there is if a leader doesn't get it now, he'll get it on the back end in the profit statement. It's really about representation. When you have representation, your advertisement, your product your product offerings, all that is making representation at your company, then you're thinking about that consumer that's similar to you. And I do think that Procter & Gamble gets it from their commercials and their advertisements. They have promoted enough people to be the decision makers and the face of the company in order to put great messages out there. And then think about those commercials that fall flat and you go, what were you thinking? The first thing, you know, Twitter says is, who's in your executive office? Who green-lighted this? Because it's openly racist or sexist or ableist or whatever. So you've got to have that representation in your executive office so that, you know, willing to be the voice to make sure that you're able to hear things. So it goes to your bottom line. It's not about, it should be about doing the right thing, but some people aren't about doing the right thing. So when they're not about doing the right thing, it's okay, here's your bottom line, and here's how your money, your profit, and everything, your retention, all that is going to be impacted when you make a diverse workforce. So that's number one. Two is you got to get leaders to role model. If the leader's not willing to do it, role model it, internalize it, then I think that you got a hard road to process. I remember we do some diversity training and the white men come in like this and feel like it's being punitive. It'd be an all-day diversity training and we check the box, we write the attendance rolls, we did it for 2,000, whatever. And it's gotta be an ongoing thing. It's gotta be years long, integrated into the mission, integrated into the fabric, integrated into your retention plans, your recruiting plans, your, you know, just your daily work of this company, because, and if it's not gonna work. I talked to my friend who's pretty high up at Whirlpool, and she said her major aha has been that the white men who lead the company have to start the conversation. It cannot be the women, it cannot be the Black men, it has to be a white man who's got this flag, who's talking about it. She says, or it's fallen flat. And she's done decades of work in this, and it's been a recent aha for her. So those are just some of the things that I wrote down about opening that conversation.
And before either Teresa or Nicole go, so Dawn, when that white male doesn't open up the conversation, what do we do?
I think, again, going back for suffrage has been on my mind this week because I had a big Zoom about suffrage. You don't give up. You keep coming back. You've got to have a group of women that keep coming back. And with the suffrage rights, it was some people approached it this way, some people come from here, some people came from here. So you got to have a multi-pronged approach to get to this leader, because you, at the end of the day, you've got to get the leader to do it. If you're doing it at the bottom of the organization, it may work to float up, but from what I've seen and my friends have seen, that leader's got to really internalize it. So I think you just keep hammering at it, and it may not come this year, next year, or even while you're at the company, but something was started, a seed was planted.
So in full disclosure, as I've had my own business for 25 years, so I'm at the top. And so everything is always floated down, even when I had a multicultural salon and day spa, serving everyone as far as clients, as well as who I employed. But in my notes here, what I took down, because Dawn pretty much touched on anything that I would probably point out if I was working in the corporate environment or having to not be the person in charge. But biases is really important, and addressing biases within companies, which I think comes from diversity training. And like Dawn said, not a one-time seminar where you contract someone to come in for a day or a week or to check mark a box that, yep, we got through that. It has to be an ongoing conversation. I think that Andrea Hendricks, like for anybody who can tune in for her next month, I think that she'll probably address that. And that would be a person like Mona, remember this conversation and bring that up again with her. From hearing from clients that are working with big companies here in Kansas City, and I don't want to out any of the companies, but they're having these panel discussions and they're bringing in the people of color, the Black people, and having discussions. And one thing that stood out to me that one of my clients said was when one of her Black coworkers was like, when we get a seat at the table, when we start seeing ourselves in those offices upstairs and in some of those executive positions, because there are people who work in the company right now who are qualified to be up there and they're not. When we start seeing that happen, that's when we'll know we're making true change. And this is not just about things like taking down some statues and renaming Aunt Jemima syrup. Like those are symbolic things and those are nice, but until we see some real measurable changes and results, we're really still in the same place. Travis?
Yeah, when I hear what you are talking about, I think about just the power of changing and decision making and who has that power. And when I think about companies, I think that I really believe this, that how that company moves through space and does businesses begins with the leadership. And those leaders attract people that look like them or have the same vibe as them, something, and they just keep on doing that. And that trickles down to who you hire to clean the building. And so if everyone always looks the same and thinks the same, you're not really going to change. And so when we're talking about this special time that we're in right now, and I think about the question, how do we open those conversations? And I think about those leaders, they need to do some soul searching. Like, why is it you want to have a diversity committee, for example? I mean, what are you going to do when it comes to diversity and inclusion? Are you going to do anything in this time that we're at right now? Like, what does it mean to you? Does it mean anything to you in the first place? Because I think sometimes when we're at work and stuff happens outside of work, but in lots of our spaces, it doesn't impact what happens inside of work. It's like the office is a vacuum. We just keep on doing our work. And if you have stuff external to that, that's external, and then you work on it out there. But I don't think we can afford to do that anymore. And if you thought they couldn't afford to do it before, now thousands and thousands of people in this country and around the world are saying we can't afford to continue to do this way. In terms of what are you doing? Are you going to be speaking up for people of color, immigrants, marginalized people? What are you going to be doing? Are you going to lend your voice to this? We're having this conversation because we are clearly willing to be in a conversation like this. But is your company willing to do that in a meaningful way? I mean, and how long do you want to sit and say things like, I don't understand, I don't know, that's over my head, I don't get it? A problem with that is that right now, people are protesting. I think it was 2 weeks ago, there were almost 4,000 protests going on around the world. Okay, so when you think about that, one of the things that I think of is that in our history, we have had issues related to race. And you see pictures of a lot of Black people and some white people sprinkled in there, okay? And now I have a colleague in Harlem. He's like, there are hundreds of white people marching down the street and I live deep in Harlem. And so you see all of these people. What am I saying? I'm saying that there are more than just, immigrants and people of color, et cetera, marching and protesting. There are also white people and they are of different age groups. And these younger generations, if you just focus on them, they're out there lending their voices. They are part of your future workforce. What are you going to be able to do to demonstrate that you can connect with them? and create a space for them. We spend a lot of time talking about millennials and what millennials want, but the things that millennials like are the things that everybody else ultimately needs too. Safe spaces, inclusive spaces, opportunity to think and express yourself, an opportunity to lead, to not be held back. And so if your company is having a diversity committee, for example, and going through diversity training with no intention of what you're going to be doing with that, how you're going to use that, is that going to affect what leadership looks like, to the point where the person that, if you're, let's say your all white company or all white leadership board starts to diversify, and maybe in terms of age, ethnicity, gender, do those people also have the power to create change in the organization, or are they just there? Because again, there are people out there right now that are your future workforce. They're how you are going to grow as a company or an organization. And I feel like if you are not able to connect with them, then your company's probably not going to grow. And are you okay with that? Most businesses, I don't know, I have not met any business or any city that doesn't want to grow. I gave a talk years ago about equity, and I connected it to finance, because PolicyLink talks about economic development and jobs and all this kind of stuff. And I gave that talk, and somewhere in the middle of it, my voice was cracking, because what I'm feeling like we're hearing things like, well, maybe I don't want your money. What are you saying? Business people, to Don's point, usually want to figure out how to make their bottom line better. But we have created situations where, no, you're saying, no, I don't want that. And I've had personal experiences where you want my money, but you don't want to make it easy for me to give it to you. So I think companies really need to think about that. Like, what are their motives?
I think that is such an important point, is we all want the change. We all want something to happen, but many of us, I have to be careful my words, many people aren't willing to do the hard work to make it happen. And that's what this conversation is all about. By the way, those are not
put on here. Dion put competition, rewards, litigation. I mean, it all ties in together. There's not any part of your organization that's not going to be positively impacted by having more representation.
Absolutely. So we're getting to the point where I'm going to ask one more question. Here's what's very interesting. In the private chat to me, there were at least 6 people that said, do the panelists have any book recommendations? And in my head, I'm thinking, wait a minute, we've got to be proactive with our own learning, right? So I'm going to ask everybody on the call. There's still 61 people on the call today. I would ask all of us from our different perspectives to put something in the chat if you feel that there's a book, a movie, a TV series, a podcast, or something that has directly impacted you. We would all love to be able to learn from everybody. I don't want to exclude the panelists from sharing any book that they would like to, but I think it's important that everybody has their word on that. So drop those in the chat if you can, because there's a lot. Make sure you do this publicly to everybody, so it's not just coming up on my feed. So I'm going to ask 2 questions. If you have a book, movie, podcast to share, great. But the last one is, when we talk about this whole supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, and over the past 60 days, many of us have been researching, what are those locally owned Black businesses? Who can I support? Where am I going to go get my takeout food from? Where am I going to order my books from? What are other things that you have seen being effective, not just from the white people, but any person of color or Black person? Share with us your tips on how we can all support each other.
I was copying and pasting some book recommendations. I think it starts, like you said, Nicole said, with your soul and your heart. You got to have the right intentions. Intentions are hard to see. You may have to work on them and approach a person multiple times to kind of crack the hard surface. But intentions, conversation, there's a lot of people here who have powerful positions. Look at the systems in your organization. We really didn't talk a lot about systemic racism. If you have so many Black people start at the company, what's the attrition and the retention, and how do they ascend? Are they getting promoted? Look at systems that are unintentionally holding people back. or systems that could help promote and support people. So where you have the power, look at your systems. And then socially, have that conversation, have the right intentions when you approach someone.
Gosh, I don't like Dawn going ahead of me. I mean, actually, it's kind of good. It's like, thank you. Yes, what Dawn said. I just scribbled down communication being super important. And also in all facets, personal and professional, really understanding what microaggressions are and what overt and covert racism is. You know, it's like up until George Floyd, I swear to you, it's like some people didn't realize that racism still exists. And I'm gonna get this wrong. Some of you may know Stacey Abrams. Ladies, maybe one of the two of you knows the book, her book that's just come out. My husband is reading it, and he ran in the room the other day about how there's a Supreme Court, I don't know if you guys, but it was like in the last 5 to 8 years, a Supreme Court ruling that ruled that racism no longer exists. And so he ran in the room reading her book and realizing that's why, with all this gerrymandering and polls being closed down, and I'm a Georgia peach, I'm from Georgia, and watching the former Secretary of State and now governor be able to make it so difficult for people in Georgia to be able to vote. You know, they sat in line from 6 a.m. Oh, it says I have a poor connection. Sorry about that. It said that they waited in line from 6 a.m. to midnight or longer with one, you know, polling machine, and you know, just had to camp out, whereas in the white suburbs of Georgia, they were in and out the door, easy breezy piece of cake. And so we've been like, why does this continue to go on all over the country? What is going on with our voting system? And my husband had the answer from that Stacey Abrams book with the Supreme Court ruling that states that when you can start from a premise that racism no longer exists, then that's how we get here. Until we fix that, because you know how, I'm not a lawyer, but how that works with one court ruling and then everything else is cited based upon that court ruling. So a lot of things since we got that court ruling saying that racism no longer exists, which we know is a lie, everything else after it has come from that, all the way to why is there no action when all this craziness is going on in the Black communities or underrepresented communities not even being able to vote, or like in Georgia, again, I know the Georgia politics to a degree because that's home to me, understanding how people were, are not allowed to vote or are, I'm not using the right words, but being taken off of the roll. You know, they should be allowed to vote, but then they get there to vote and find out that they can't because of, oh, we're sorry, you were just taken off. How those shenanigans take place and why nothing is done about it. It's from that court ruling, and I apologize, you guys, I'll have to find it for you, but so much is based upon that and how we get here. So that's where we all need to stay educated and stay awake and aware of how these things happen, when sometimes we're wondering, but how could this be? It's happening right in our faces, and either people aren't paying attention or we don't even understand how we got here. So I think that's really important.
I love everything that you guys were saying, ladies. What I would also add is to think about the context. Be critical of the things that you already been taught, the way that engagement's supposed to happen, what you're supposed to think, who you're supposed to be meeting with, the images that you look at, all of that. Really be critical of that, because I think, and I'm going to mention this when I give my talk next week, one of the things I touch on really quickly is colonialism and how that is informed and shaped, how we're educated, again, images we see, all of that stuff. And that also means it's so successful because it's been going on for so long that, or its impacts are so, they radiate so strongly that I think choices have already been made for people, like in their minds, about what they want to do, who they want to talk to, where they want to go. And to stop doing that. Do something different. And find people, again, that you can connect with, that you can communicate with. Try communicating in a different way and being open to people, so we can go forward together. Because really, I mean, even if you look at the natural environment, the more diverse it is, the stronger it is. Monocultures don't survive. That's the same for your company. So what do you want to see for your future? I think we all want to be here. We want to go forward and create great things. So we need to come together to do that.
So I found it for you guys. So I'll go ahead and leave it here just so you'll have it. So don't leave you hanging. It was a conversation my husband and I were having about the topic I was speaking of. It was a 2013 ruling, Shelby County in Alabama versus Holder. The court asserted a premise that racism had ended in election practices. And so it must be a federal oversight. This single court case has changed the game and allowed for new legal options for voter suppression. Because of how the court ruled in favor of Shelby, politicians were free to restrict voting anywhere. So there it is. And the book is Stacey Abrams, Our Time Is Now. And so, of course, for those of you that know what happened in Georgia, it was the Secretary of State who's now the governor. And he should have, in my opinion, recused himself because the vote was so close. Stacey Abrams had like 48.5 and he had like 50.1% of the vote or something. It was really, really close. And what should have happened is a recount. And because he was Secretary of State, he did not recuse himself and there was not a recount. And on top of a lot of people, like 200,000 people, mostly Black folks, or a lot of people of color, were taken off of the voting rolls, polls, whatever. We're not allowed to vote. So those are things that we need to all be more vigilant and diligent about, understanding and knowing and not acting like these things don't happen or you don't have time to pay attention. Like, this is how we can all start to be the change that we want to see in having everybody have a seat at the table and having something more like equality going on in this country.
Ooh, I have to take a deep breath. I'm not sure where to start my wrap up right now. The first thing I want to say, first of all, is thank you. Thank you to Dawn, thank you to Nicole, thank you to Travis, and thank you all of the participants that took time out of your day. 90 minutes is a big chunk of time, and I hope it was worth it. But don't anybody log off yet, okay? So I'm gonna ask Renee, I think she's still there in the background. Renee wants to talk for just a few seconds about our upcoming Midwest Leadership Summit. But before I turn it over to her, I hope you're all following in the chat. Oh my gosh, I don't think I've hosted a Zoom program where we have so much amazing content in the chat. So in order for you to find it again, if you click the little, I know they have a name, the little 3 dots down in the bottom right-hand corner, that allows you to save the chat to a text file. So it's saved on your computer so you can get all of the great information. I would love for us to do a follow-up on this. I have no idea what it looks like, but all I know is this is at Central Exchange. We want to keep the conversation going. So if anybody has ideas on other people that they would love to participate, and the 3 of you, we would always invite you back. Eventually, someday, maybe even this year, we'll be seeing people face to face again, but no promises. So again, my gratitude for everybody on the call today. And remember, you'll be getting a link to this recording. So if you want to share that with other people, you are welcome to do. This was an open program for us today. So on behalf of Central Exchange, I want to thank everybody for being here. And Renee, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Absolutely, thanks. Well, I'm gonna ditto my thanks as well to Dawn, Nicole, and Travis. It was very inspiring to hear from your perspectives and allow us to, begin that process of moving forward and how can we make a difference. So we have at Central Exchange, our diversity inclusions and opening that dialogue is very important to us. As you can see in my background, we have a Midwest Leadership Summit, which is a leadership conference focused on the development of women. And it's for anyone because everything's amazing, but we really like to, we put that emphasis and focus there. We happen to have as one of our keynotes at the upcoming conference, which is the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd of this month, a diversity and inclusion keynote, and they're going to be talking about leading united. And it's going to be another powerful conversation, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. And if you just go out to midwestleadershipsummit.org. You know, registration is still open, and you can just click the button there, but it's going to be led by Michelle Wimes, who's the Chief Diversity and Professional Development Officer at Ogletree, Deacons, Nash, Schmook, and Stewart. And so that's a mouthful, but she's amazing, and our panelists are amazing. So please go check it out. And that's just one of many, many things available as part of the conference in just a week and a half. So please go check that out. And then just as a reminder, we've already talked about our next Real Talk program will be August 14th with Dr. Andrea Hendricks on her book, The Big Journey, Bold Inclusion for Greatness. So we will definitely be continuing the dialogue, and please be a part of that with us. Mona, back to you.
And one more time, if anybody would like to be my guest to hear Travis speak next Tuesday at noon, it'll be a Zoom call. Please just send me an email at mona@centralexchange.org. I would love for you to be my guest. I wish you a happy rest of the day. Let's take what we've learned and let's put it into action, because unless we act, nothing is going to change. Blessings to everybody. Thank you all for being here today. Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.